Hello. I'm in my car again. Thank you for tuning in to The Misogynistic Feminist. I'm Sasha, and I quickly want to talk to you about an issue that fits my channel perfectly, which is the intersection of pop culture and politics, and that is the Nick Reiner situation. And I recently did a video just playing around, learning how to do the technology. I did a short about Nick Reiner, and I think like 40 people watched it, and it wasn't really that good. And then the only comment I got was that they couldn't really hear me because I was playing around with like background AI music or whatever. So I'm doing another video. I'm not going to play around with the technology. I'll just do this in my car. But okay, so just to do a recap on the Rob Reiner murder. So Rob Reiner is a beloved movie director. By all accounts, except for Donald Trump, everybody loved him. He was very liberal, and so Donald Trump probably hated him for that. But even Republicans, just everybody seemed to genuinely love Rob Reiner and his movies, and he did movies that ranged from The Princess Bride to When Harry Met Sally to Stand By Me to Misery with Kathy Bates. And this is Spinal Tap. So he's done so many different genres of movie and did them so amazingly well. And by all accounts, his wife, Michelle, was just as wonderful of a person. So they have three kids, Rami, Nick, and Jake. And Nick is the one who is in jail right now, awaiting trial. And he is, I think, about 32 years old. So by all accounts, Nick murdered his parents, and then right after that happened, he had Alan Jackson, a very, very, very expensive, famous defense attorney who defended Karen Reed and other high-profile cases. He instantly had Alan Jackson as his defense attorney, and then something happened, and Alan Jackson went out there and said, through no fault of his or no fault of Nick's, he can no longer represent him, but he wouldn't say why, and we all knew it had to do with money. And so what we think happened was that somehow somebody got Alan Jackson right away, but then the siblings, whose parents were murdered by all accounts by their brother, decided, hey, we don't want our parents' money to be used to defend this. I don't know what they think of their brother. I think I read that they think that he's an absolute monster, but they probably don't want him to get the death penalty. They just don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. I used to thought of being a defense attorney at one point because I'm so opposed to the death penalty. And I still am opposed to capital punishment, which might seem weird because this whole video is going to be about how much I hate Nick Reiner. No, but I don't believe in the death penalty. But I also don't believe in people being able to get away with murder and to eventually people who are extremely dangerous be able to get out and potentially murder somebody again. And I can tell you that if you go to a psychiatric hospital for murder, you might get out eventually. You might get out within a matter of years of seeing it happen. So again, if you don't want Nick Reiner to get out and to be on the streets, then you do care whether he's found guilty by reason of not guilty by reason of insanity. And like I said, I used to want to be a defense attorney, but after, I don't know if my life experience working here, I don't know what it is, but I do not know how you can be a good defense attorney or a good, well-paid prosecutor and have any moral compass. Because let's just go with the defense attorney. Their job is to do what Alan Jackson is doing. Their job is to find any way to get their client out of whatever situation they're in. And with Nick, the only thing he could say is that he was insane at the time and didn't know the difference between right and wrong at the time that he committed this murder. So that's what Alan Jackson is doing. And again, I don't see how somebody who has any moral background, any moral backbone can fight to get somebody like Nick Reiner with the most lenient sentence they can get. That's their job. I understand that's their job, but I think it's a shitty job. I do think Nick Reiner is ill mentally, psychotic, but I don't want to get into the law because I'm not a medical person. I'm not a psychologist. I don't really have any right to talk about it from that perspective. I can talk about from the perspective of if he gets away with this by being found not guilty, he could get out of a psychiatric hospital in a matter of years. Okay. And he would still get his hands on his parents' money. There's just no way that this should happen. And that's a whole other issue. I'll probably do more videos on that. But how this all comes down to politics is, again, about money. So I already did a video that talked about progressive politics. And as a progressive myself, I'm going to be talking a lot about progressive politics and the hypocrisy of some of it. And I'm not going to pick on conservatives as much just because I'm not a conservative. And so I'm trying to figure out like my own political views, my own identity, how these intersect with political or pop culture issues that I focus a lot on. So that's why it seems like I'm going to always be picking on the liberals, because I am a liberal, but I still see some of the issues with this. So a big part of progressive politics is capitalism. They don't believe in the billionaire class. They don't believe that people should have a lot more rights and privileges just because they have money. And so Nick is the perfect example of somebody born with a silver spoon in their mouth. So he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth by rich parents, but he was also born privileged because he had such kind, wonderful, nice parents who did everything in their power to help this guy. They paid for him to go to cushy rehab for like 16 to 18 different times. He was living in their guest house. He had a $10,000 a month allowance. He didn't have to pay for food, shelter, any of that. So I think that allowance was probably to pay for drugs. I don't know. But he had the best parents, the kindest parents. Of course, I don't know. I wasn't there. Maybe they were awful and we just don't know about that. But from all accounts, they were wonderful to him. They were kind of like the gentle parents. And I would consider myself a gentle parent. But this situation really threw a curveball at me because I naively thought as long as the parents are very kind and the kids don't go through abuse or trauma, they're not going to end up murdering people. And that's obviously not true. You can do everything right as a parent and still have a kid who ends up like Nick Reiner. Fortunately, it's very rare, but it can still happen. And I've seen it happen before with people who aren't famous. And so I'm telling you, it can happen. Why does he get the best defense attorney? Why should he get somebody like Alan Jackson? Because he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. So he's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He got everything handed to him. He got to just do drugs, treat people like shit, ruin his parents' guest house, destroy things. He destroyed that family for years before he actually murdered them. And I watched a bunch about this when this first happened. And there's videos of him bragging about destroying the guest house, bragging about pretending to be crazy. I don't like that word, but I'm using that because that's what he used, to go to a psych hospital and to get his hands on drugs to abuse. So he made his parents' life and his siblings' life a living hell for years before this happened, ever since he was a little kid. There seems like there's something just really wrong with him. And maybe he was insane in the moments that he murdered his parents. I don't know how you can murder somebody without being somewhat insane, but that was self-caused, in my opinion, from all the meth and all the drugs that he was doing. So I don't want to, nobody's going to watch this video anyway, so I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for saying my opinion, but I do want to say this is my opinion, and based on the facts that I read about the case. And we don't know, like we found out very recently that he had a trust fund set up for him. And when he was 30 years old, he was supposed to get like 1.5 million. And then when he's 35, he's supposed to get another 1.5 million. So now we're thinking that this might have been part of the big fight or friction with his parents, is that they didn't give him the 1.5 million when he turned 30 for good reason. And maybe that's why he murdered them, to get access to this money. And you hear about these situations all the time with people murdering somebody to get their life insurance or whatever. But you never hear that people could be found actually guilty of murdering somebody and then inherit the money that the person who they murdered had. It makes no sense. And just the idea that this is even possible just seems so opposed to progressive views and ideology, that somebody who murdered two wonderful people who happened to be their parents, should be allowed to have the best defense possible because the person that they murdered happened to be wealthy and happened to be their parents, and so they deserve that wealth that they've had their whole life. It just makes me very angry, and I don't know how anyone could defend that. And one thing I hear people say, which is true, is that Rob and Michelle wouldn't want him to be they wouldn't want him to get the death penalty. I wouldn't want him to get the death penalty either. And that they would want to forgive him. So because he had such wonderful, nice, kind, liberal, empathetic parents that he murdered, he should then be given forgiveness because his parents would have forgiven him. But what if he was raised by abusive parents, or by like parents who weren't just these nice, wonderful people like Rob and Michelle? Then, well, his parents probably wouldn't care whether he lived or died, so he shouldn't, he should be given the death penalty. I don't know how people can justify things in their mind by saying, well, Nick's parents were really kind and they didn't believe in the death penalty, so we should do what we can to help Nick. So because he was so lucky to be born with such nice, wonderful parents and with so much money, he should still be entitled to the money when he murders his parents. But if he was born without a silver spoon in his mouth, like most murderers, and had to deal with trauma and abuse, then whoever he murders, let's say he murders his parents, well, we can't help him out because his parents wouldn't have been so forgiving. I guess I just don't know what this justification is. It seems like, what is it about Nick? Why would anyone want to defend him? Okay, he's a white, straight male, so we don't have, any oppression with that to talk about. He murdered two of the nicest people in the world who were the nicest people to him, and he might have just done it for money, and now he's saying he's entitled to that money and he's entitled to the best defense that money can buy. I don't know how anyone with any progressive viewpoints could think this is okay. I don't know why more people aren't speaking out against this, but I just had to say my piece on this. That man does not deserve $1 from his family, from his parents. He was making so much money off of his parents just by an allowance. What did he do with that money? He didn't save a dime of it. I don't know. Why don't we give this much love to other people who murder, like serial killers, just because they weren't lucky enough to have really, really kind, famous, wealthy parents? So I don't know. Makes no sense to me, and I just had to speak my piece. Thank you for listening to me ramble, and this is what you see there. It's my Taylor Swift, whatever these things are called. Okay.